done by then for sure. All right, so we're continuing on through the patriarch era. Last week we covered Abraham and Isaac. The video recording is online if you want to reference that. And we already got all the handouts distributed. This week we're covering Jacob and Joseph, the second two patriarchs. Next week we'll move into the Exodus era. And one of the poetry books, Job, fits right into there as well. And so we'll cover that independently of the Exodus, but at that time frame. And then through the Exodus era, we'll cover the Law of Moses and the tabernacle design because it is detailed out specifically in lots of chapters. There is not any class on Sunday, November 10th because I will be out of town. And then we'll cover the feasts and the calendar of the Hebrews or the Israelites on the 17th there before Thanksgiving yet. So that is what we're looking forward. But tonight we'll go ahead and continue with Jacob and Joseph. So most of the book of Genesis is devoted to these four patriarchs. Like we noted last week, Abraham gets about a dozen chapters towards the beginning of Genesis. Isaac only gets 3 chapters to himself. He's a transitional figure. I kind of like to think that he gets a pass because he was the guy on the altar on Mount Moriah who almost got sacrificed, and thereafter his son Jacob referred to God as the fear of his father Isaac. Yes, Ryan.
So, you know how God was like, "Oh, Abraham, you're such a good guy because you almost sacrificed your son for me," and yeah, you're truly faithful. What about Isaac? He willingly went on an altar when his dad said, "Hey, get on this altar-looking thing and ask no questions."
Isaac did ask a question on the way up there. He's like, "Dad, we've got the fire and we've got the wood, but where's the offering for the sacrifice?" And his father said, "God himself will provide the sacrifice."
Right.
But then it also says Isaac was tied up on the altar. So this was serious. And it's not like he was a 5-year-old. He may have been easily between 12 and 24. I don't know how this worked out.
No thanks.
He's not shrimp.
So does he also get recognition yeah, you're pretty cool because you kept your cool while your dad attempted to sacrifice?
It doesn't say he kept his cool though.
No, we don't get that part of the story.
He might not have kept his cool.
Yeah.
But wasn't it just Abraham and Isaac up there? Would you really think Abraham was 200 years old? Be able to tie his son when he's 20?
Yeah, so it's just Abraham, and he lived to 175, but at this point he's somewhere between 110 and 125. All we know is that it's before Sarah died, and
they leave their servant
yeah, they left the servants at the bottom of the mountain. So
the servants well, guys.
yeah, but Abraham might have been a very fit 120-year-old. I don't think he was an old geezer like we would expect a 120-year-old to be because he still had another 55 years left in him. And so...
And more kids.
Yeah, and more children. Yeah, he had 7 more sons, I think.
That's crazy.
So he had a lot of vitality left.
I'm not sure, though, if... I understand that God told him to do it, and that's great. I don't know if I'd ever be able to see my father the same way after he tried to sacrifice me.
I don't think Isaac saw God the same way.
Isaac didn't see God the same way. He understood the fear of the Lord in a way that none of us ever will. So there's a few more nuggets from that story if you look at the video online from last week. So moving on though, Jacob is covered in Genesis 27 through 35, and Joseph is Genesis 37 through 50. I believe Ishmael and Judah are covered in chapter 36 there. So Jacob, if you look at the genealogy, he's the second-born twin son of Isaac and Rebekah. But he's the one who gets all the advantages in life because he's a shrewd, wily fellow. His name means the supplanter, or he who grabs from the heel. If you ever have somebody grab your heel, they can throw you over really violently quickly. It's not a good way to go down. And that was Jacob's name. So his brother comes in from hunting one day and is famished and starving, and Jacob's got soup already, and his brother says, give me some of that soup, I'm about to die, and Jacob sees he's got negotiating leverage. And he's like, I'll only give you soup if you trade me your birthright. Which is insane that Esau acquiesced, but he just was like, what good is the birthright if I'm dead? I'm gonna die, so give me a bowl of soup. So,
overdramatic.
yeah, he was a little overdramatic, and it cost him. So Esau is still due the blessing, but Jacob is the favorite son of Rebekah, who's also conniving and wheeling and dealing, and so she hears that Isaac is about to give Esau his blessing because they think that he's old and gonna die soon. He doesn't die soon. He dies a long time later, actually. Yeah, really. That's in the timeline. So, anyhow, Jacob impersonates his brother Esau, and he can get away with it because his father is blind, and gets the blessing that Isaac was intending to give to Esau. And Esau was very bitter about this and wanted to kill his son, or his brother, I mean.
Honestly, I would too. Like.
Yes. He wanted to kill him. And Rebekah was like, if my husband dies, then my son is going to kill my other son. I don't want to lose both of you in the same day. And so she convinces Jacob, you should flee to my family in Paddan Aram and find yourself a wife there. And she cooks up a really good scenario to convince Isaac that this is a great idea, and Isaac actually generates the idea. Because Esau had married some Canaanite women, and Rebekah, as a good wife, walks into Isaac and says, my life is unbearable because of these Canaanite women. I can't stand them. It would be awful if Jacob married one of these awful Canaanite women that Esau has married. It makes my life miserable. So Isaac calls in Jacob and says, Jacob, you have to go to your mother's homeland where she came from and find a wife up there.
Rebecca would be such a good politician.
This is like a soap opera.
Genesis is amazing reading. Yes, it is like a soap opera in some ways. It's
It's
wheeling, dealing drama at its greatest. And it makes all of our lives feel like, hey, I'm not that messed up. Because look what they're doing. Lot has 2 sons by his 2 daughters. No one, yes, like, our lives are not that far out.
They got him drunk.
Abraham calls his wife his sister. Isaac does the same thing.
Yep, all
Abraham
kinds
did
of
it twice.
things.
Isaac only did it once.
Yes.
Okay, but the daughter is your
Yes.
Yeah. So that's the appendix to the story about Sodom and Gomorrah getting destroyed. All right, so key thing I'm going to point out to you, when Jacob flees to Paddan Aram, he's at the young age of 77.
Oh, such a wee baby.
Yes. And we can calculate this based on his age when he entered the land of Egypt at the age of 130, because Joseph's age is known, and so we can calculate backwards from there and figure out that Jacob was 77 when he left. Now, when he leaves, God gives him a promise. And at the age of 77, remember Abraham was 75 when he got his promise, and so Jacob is only running 2 years behind his grandfather. God's promise to Jacob is, behold, the Lord stood above it. I think, yeah, that's where he was sleeping, I think, that night. He says, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and to your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Ryan.
Why is God promising things to Jacob when he is such an odd human being and tried to starve his brother because he was greedy? Like, why is God giving just out promises to these naughty people?
He's entrepreneurial.
So that's an interesting thing that you bring up. God's grace is not earned by our actions. He just chooses and determines this. And it was actually prophesied through Rebekah before they were born that the younger would be greater than the older brother, and the older one would serve the younger brother.
Poor
And so
Esau.
before they were born, God had made a decision between them. But through the course of their life, which is worse, To desire the blessing of God or to despise your birthright?
God.
What was his?
His birthright, he was supposed to inherit the double portion of his father's possessions. And so, like, if you can imagine dividing your parents' inheritance and you're due a double portion, that's your birthright in the inheritance, and you trade that right for a bowl of soup. It's just ridiculously short-term perspective. And God did not favor or bless that mindset that Esau had through the course of his entire life.
So if there's two of them, he would have got 2/3 of it, and the other guy would have gotten
1/3.
But he,
Yep.
but he favored,
Jacob.
yeah, Jacob, who's like,
Wheeling and dealing and
I want
conniving.
some moolah, so
Yes.
I'm gonna threaten
Now, it's
my
an
brother.
interesting thing that
And that's a
the
great
account in
mindset.
Genesis does not justify Jacob's motivations or his methods, but he is the one that was chosen by God. And we see that here, and Jacob continues to be the wheeler, dealer, negotiator, shrewd guy as it continues on here, but
The Bible is
he
loaded.
inherits the promises that were given to Abraham and then inherited by Isaac, and Jacob is the heir of that same promise.
To be fair, Judah did some crazy things, and we know the Israelites as Judah's big tribe, so
So not only did Jacob get his the birthright, but he got the
The blessing.
he stole everything from his brother.
Yep.
Just think about it this way, there's a whole lot of people in the Bible who were really messed up, and God still chose to use them.
Yep.
That should be encouraging, because I don't know of you, but I'm messed up.
I'm not as messed up as these folk.
Great, they all give you even workers.
That's what I'm saying, it should be encouraging.
Alright, continuing on. Here, this is the map. You can look at your Middle Eastern map if you want to get a little frame of reference here, but this is the journey that Jacob was taking. This is several weeks of wandering, but it's not aimless wandering. He was wandering with a purpose. So he leaves the land of Canaan, where his father was down in the south by Beersheba. Dry, deserty landscape, really good for raising sheep though. And Jacob goes through the land of Canaan. He has a dream at Bethel on the way. That's where he gets the promise, and then he makes it up to Haran. Notice this is also the same journey that Abraham's servant had to take to get Isaac's wife Rebekah. All the way back, this is where Terah's other descendants landed. So Jacob is up there in Haran for 20 years. He gets up there and he quickly finds Rachel, who introduces him to his uncle, Laban. And so Jacob and Rachel and Leah are all cousins. First cousins, and yep.
Yeah.
First cousins by their mother and father, and second cousins if you go a different generation back through Isaac. So this is kind of an interesting set of inbreeding that we don't recommend today, but it worked back then because the genetics of humanity were not quite as badly messed up yet. So inbreeding did not generate the detrimental effects that we're used to in Appalachia and everything.
The reference. Okay, but I'm starting to think that maybe it did have some effects because these people were a little crazy. Maybe they were just a tad bit.
You gotta remember, if you live 175 years and you have to condense all the drama of your life down into 12 chapters, you're really just getting the highlights. And there's a lot of boring days just watching sheep. So, anyway,
Maybe that's why.
up in Haran, Jacob works 7 years for his first wife, Rachel. They're supposed to get married on the wedding night. Laban is sneaky and swaps sisters. And somehow Jacob gets married to Leah instead of Rachel.
Why would he do that?
Okay.
What benefit does that?
So this is just it. You just worked 7 years for my daughter Rachel, and alas, now you're married to Leah. You
So
still
now,
want Rachel.
that conniving
You're
little naughty
going to
monkey.
have to work another 7
He
years.
really wanted Rachel.
Yes,
Right?
Jacob
He was like in love with
wanted
her.
Rachel. He was thoroughly in
It's
love
not
with
like
Rachel.
He was just, yeah.
So,
He worked 7 years to marry Rachel.
Jacob wakes up the next morning and realizes he has Leah and not Rachel.
Oh no.
And he is upset and infuriated.
Oh, poor
And so
And
he,
rightfully so.
yes, he goes to Laban, and Laban's like, in our land it's not custom to give away the younger daughter before you give away the older daughter, so I had to give you Leah first. Go through the bridal week with her, and then we'll have another wedding, and you can marry Rachel too if you work another 7 years
What the
for
skip
me.
is a bridal week? I want one of those. Is it?
It's like a honeymoon for 7 days. That's
Oh,
the idea.
I don't want a honeymoon back in these days.
Right.
It's probably, guys, let's take a break from watching the sheep.
So, key thing to note here though is that Jacob gets 2 wives in 2 weeks' time, but he has to work for 14 years to have rights to both of them.
That's a lot of good eating for 2 weeks.
It is a good wedding celebration for
Let
2
me get
weeks
this
in a row.
straight. So he marries Leah unintentionally.
Yep.
And they have their little honeymoon.
Mm-hmm.
And then he marries Rachel.
Yes.
And then they have their honeymoon.
Yep.
And now he has to work.
Now he's got 2 wives, but he has got to work for 7 more years, tending his father-in-law's sheep. Yes. Now, through the course of this, Rachel and Leah are having a competition as to who can produce sons, and
Oh, they must have been so bored. If
Leah
that's what their entertainment
is
was.
winning. She produces 4 sons: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. And this is on the genealogy here if you want to track this one out. So Rachel realizes she's not having children. She screams at her husband Jacob, "Give me sons or I'm going to die." And Jacob's like, "Am I in the place of God?" And so then finally Rachel says, "Here, have my maidservant." And I think it was Bilhah.
Yeah, it was,
Yep.
I think it was Bilhah.
So Rachel gives him Bilhah because this is their social security policy in the past. If you can't have sons, your maidservant subs in for you, and she has sons on your behalf so that you have sons who can take care of you in your old age. So now Jacob is married to Bilhah, Leah, and Rachel. Leah stops having sons, and all of a sudden she realizes Rachel's feeling uppity on this because all of a sudden she's getting sons through Bilhah, and she's like, "Jacob, here's my maidservant Zilpah.
Oh,
Now you
here
can
we
have
go.
sons through her." So Jacob has 2 sons through Zilpah, 2 sons through Bilhah, and then finally Rachel conceives and has a son, and that's Joseph. So this is the firstborn son of the favorite wife, Joseph. Now you can imagine what it would be like being his sibling. Yeah.
How did these people not Never mind.
So remember that soap opera? It intensified.
Oh, are we gonna get into the
We're getting
juicy
to
stuff?
like
Yep.
the Maury show.
This is, yep. Alright. So then Jacob wants to leave Laban after 14 years. He's like, "I've got my wives, I've got my children." He's had quite a few here by this point in time.
Let's count them. 1, 2.
He hasn't had all 12 of them yet.
What?
He has
Oh, that's
11
not
sons in 13 years. He had 4 wives to work with. It's not that hard. But anyway, so he's had several of them. Not sure exactly how many and which ones precisely. But Laban's like, "You're so good to have working for me. God's blessed me. Name your wages. I'll pay you in livestock." And so Jacob says, "Give me all the speckled and spotted sheep and goats." And so Laban removes all the speckled and spotted sheep from his flocks, sends them 3 days away with his sons, and says, "Jacob, you can have all the speckled and spotted sheep and goats in the flocks. They're yours." Well, there aren't any left. So Jacob then hybridizes them in a very fascinating fashion. This is a miraculous supernatural thing because this does not work. You can't replicate this, but Jacob was instructed by an angel to cut the bark off of poplar branches into stripes. And so when the strong
Different type of wood, I thought. Poplar was one of them though.
poplar and maybe something else too. But anyway, so when the strong sheep were breeding, he would put those in the water when they were drinking, and when the weak ones were breeding, he'd pull those branches out of the water so that all the strong sheep and goats would produce speckled and spotted young. This is why, this doesn't work in genetics, but it worked supernaturally because the angel of the Lord instructed him to do it.
I'm starting to not like this Levon guy.
Laban's not, he's really conniving. Very conniving.
He's a dookie head.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so all of the strong sheep and goats all of a sudden have speckles and spots, and they become Jacob's wages. And he is very wealthy, and all of Laban's sons are like, our inheritance is withered up because all the weak sheep and goats are all that we have left. This is awful. This is terrible. Jacob has a conference with his wives out in the field where nobody can listen to them, and he says, your father does not look at me with favor any longer. We should leave. And so they decide to leave. And he leaves without notice, and he is 97 years old when he leaves.
It was poplar, almond, and plane trees.
Okay.
Plane like Plane.
Yep.
Like airplane.
No, a plane tree, those grow in Iowa. They don't grow this far north. So, I love plane trees. They're a really cool tree. I wonder if they would grow now. Global warming has so many potential options around here. So, anyway, moving back to Laban. Laban realizes he's been tricked and Jacob has left, and so he goes and hunts Jacob down. Jacob is moving with flocks and herds, and so he's going at a snail's pace, and so he's able to catch up to him very easily. However, the angel of the Lord comes to Laban and speaks to him in a dream and says, do not do Jacob any harm, because I have chosen him and I have blessed him, and you are not allowed to harm him. And so he doesn't. And they make a truce and a treaty. They set up a heap of rocks there, and they part peacefully, and neither one of them is supposed to pass by that heap of rocks. And they don't until the reign of David, when the Arameans crossed over that heap of rocks to come to the aid of the Ammonites. And then David goes and conquers the Arameans, which are all the descendants of Laban and other allies.
Loser.
Yes, they lose. They lose badly.
That's what you get for tricking poor
Yep. All right, we'll try to finish up Jacob, and
Jacob?
we'll wait on
Yes.
Joseph. So Jacob is about to cross the river, and he's headed back home to Esau, who did not love him in the past because he wanted to kill him. So he wrestles with God by the Jabbok River, and you can see that on your map.
Wait, so he's like 97?
He's 97 years old. He wrestles with God. He wins.
What do you?
I think
how
God
do you,
let him
how
win.
do you wrestle with God?
Yeah, so God appeared in bodily form and wrestled with Jacob, and really wrestled all night long. And Jacob was winning. I kind of think God was letting him win, honestly. But he said, let go of me, and Jacob wasn't going to let go until he blessed him. And so God gave him a blessing and then wrenched his hip out of place. So he walked with a limp for the rest of his life.
I'm sorry, but
And changed his name from Jacob to Israel. Israel meaning he who struggles with God.
quite literally.
Quite literally, yes.
Guys, imagine just walking and then coming across God in human form and being like, hey, want to wrestle? You wrestle for 12 hours, and God gives you all these God gives you all these wonderful things, and you literally choke and strangle him until he says, give me a blessing! And then God's like, okay, and then you let go of him, and then he rips your hip out of its socket and changes
This is really compelling reading, isn't it?
it does.
I missed your commentary, Ryan.
I know. That's awesome.
Israel also, isn't that name also prophetically speaking over the Israelites?
Yes, the Israelite people struggled with God numerous times. That's also prophetic.
That's what you get for forcing
Yes.
God to give you a
And that
blessing.
happens a lot where big
Mhm.
things happen and then they change their name.
Yep.
God changes their name.
Yep, God changed names in the book of Genesis quite a few times. All right. He enters Canaan, reconciles with Esau. Esau's anger has blown over in 20 years. It's good if you don't hold a grudge for in excess of 20 years. Jacob
Oh.
doesn't live in the south too close to Esau, though. He starts out living in Shechem, then he moves down to Bethel, and then later he gets down to Beersheba.
Just slowly inching his way.
Yep, slowly getting his way down there. And God speaks to him again, and this is in Genesis 35:11, and he says, I am God Almighty, or El Shaddai. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall come from you, and kings shall come from your own body. The land that I gave to Abraham and Isaac I will give to you, and I will give the land to your offspring after you. You can,
What's the company of nations?
the tribes of Israel.
Oh.
They're the 12-ish tribes that they have. He continues further south. His wife Rachel is with child, and she gives birth and dies. which is very sad. This is near Bethlehem, where Jesus later gets born. And she named the son Ben-Oni, which means son of my trouble. Jacob changed his name, didn't want that. He said, son of my right hand. I'm going to call you Benjamin. And then he returns to Isaac near Mamre. A little later, Isaac dies at the age of 180, and he gets buried in the cave of Machpelah.
Did Isaac live longer than Abraham?
Yes, by 5 years.
Dang.
But he was blind for a very large chunk of it.
Oh yeah.
So this map here shows the migration from Shechem down towards Hebron, where he met up again with his father Isaac. And we will pause there and carry on with Joseph next week.
I have so many questions.
All right, so
I so was so close.